Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to the Reed and Christine Halladay Executive Lecture Series. To the disappointment of all of you, Soren Halladay is not speaking today, and we've had to fill in with Governor Mitt Romney, who will be speaking to us. For those of you who did sign up for the lunch to hear Soren and be able to pick his brain on development issues, please meet with Haley right after class at the top, and we'll still have that opportunity. We're thrilled today to be able to welcome Governor Mitt Romney, who is running to represent the people of Utah in the United States Senate. He was the 2012 Republican nominee for the President of the United States. I heard he lost. Prior to that time, as governor, he led the 2002 Salt Lake City Organizing Committee for the Winter Olympics, and with a team of volunteers and managers, helped turn the struggling games into a Utah success story. Romney was the co-founder of Bain Capital, a leading investment company, and the turnaround CEO of Bain & Company. Romney earned his bachelor's degree from Brigham Young University and his JD and MBA from Harvard University. He is a proud husband to Ann Romney, father to 5 sons, and grandfather to 24 grandchildren. He and Ann reside in Halladay and celebrated their 49th anniversary this year. Please join me in welcoming Governor Romney to the stage.
Good morning. Not a lot happening today in the news, so good to be with you. I'm going to offer a few thoughts and then turn to you for some questions and ask anything you'd like. Awkward personal questions are always the most interesting, so feel free to do that. A couple things. When I was in college, I think it was when I was in college, I read a book by someone named Napoleon Hill. It was titled Think and Grow Rich. And the thesis of the book was that people who became highly successful financially were people who had a very clear goal, knew exactly what they wanted to do, and then persistently focused on that goal for the rest of their life. Actually, he suggested reading your goal every day at the beginning of the day. I didn't do any of that. As a matter of fact, I had no idea what I was going to do when I came out of college. I thought I was going to go and become a person that would work in the automobile industry like my dad had, but I did a summer job after my first year of law school at Chrysler Corporation, and the place was so bureaucratic at that point, there was no way I wanted to make that part of my future. And nothing has really followed in the way thereafter that I might have expected. Probably the biggest departure from my business career was the decision to come out and participate in the Olympic team, not as an athlete, obviously. And as a matter of fact, there was a good deal of irony associated with my being the person that led the Olympic Games. I have 5 sons, as Tom indicated. I am the worst athlete of the 6 of us. We have Romney Olympics in the summertime where we compete on 10 different events. I always come in 6th out of the 6 of us. So when my sons heard I was taking the job, they were surprised. But when they saw it in the paper a few days later, my oldest son called and said, "Dad, I want you to know I've called the brothers this morning, and we want you to know there's not a circumstance we could have conceived of that would put you on the front page of the sports section." But I was there. The other great departure from what might have been a predictable path was the decision, of course, to get into politics. I walked into a political rally with Ann, and I turned to her and I said, "Ann, in your wildest dreams, did you ever imagine me running for governor of Massachusetts?" And she said, "Mitt, you weren't in my wildest dreams." So actually, that didn't happen. I paid for that joke. But anyway, when you run for president, and some of you may get that chance, you'll spend a lot of time in Iowa. As a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, formerly known as a Mormon, I knocked on a lot of doors in Iowa, and people didn't know who I was, so I'd explain who I was. Of the people whose doors I knocked on, of about 100, I'd say, maybe, 10 would say they were going to support me, 40 would say they were going to support someone else, and 8 agreed to be baptized. So Enough with the fun. I'm gonna turn and talk a bit about leadership because that's what you have been told I would refer to. And I knew that I could write a long essay about leadership and offer some suggestions about how to become a leader and what characterizes great leadership. And you would have forgotten what I said as quickly as I forgot lectures of that nature. And so I thought instead that I would tell you about some people who I consider unusual leaders. And describe what it is about them that I found to be compelling in terms of their leadership capability. And hopefully you'll remember at least one or two of these particular experiences and what was referenced in their name. I'll go back to my time at Bain Capital, private equity firm. We were taking our first company out to go out and raise money for it, to sell it or to get bonding financing for it. And we had hired Goldman Sachs to help us on the road show, it's called. A road show is when you go out with your investment banker and you go from place to place to convince potential buyers of the equities being offered to buy stock. And so you meet with the various institutional investors, you have a private aircraft, you fly from place to place. This was now a Friday morning. We had spent most of the week flying around together. There was a young fellow who was a junior person at Goldman Sachs named Alan Goldberg. He was on the plane with us. And Friday morning, he announced that he was going to be leaving us. We were surprised because this roadshow was not complete yet. We had important meetings to go. But he explained that he was a practicing member of the Jewish faith and that he needed to be home at his home in New York City before sundown on Friday evening. And he would be leaving us. And I thought, that can't be helpful for your career, just to announce that I'm sorry, I've got to leave a client in the middle of something that's very, very important because of my religion. And I remarked to myself, this is quite a guy that is so committed to his principles that he would make that decision. And I wonder whether his career can succeed despite that kind of commitment. And I was pleased to see that over the years he continued to be successful at Goldman Sachs, ultimately became head of their private equity business, and now runs a fund of his own with some $15 billion under management. This was in contact with him a couple of days ago as he sent me a book by a rabbi named Rabbi Sachs. So principle and abiding by principle does not mean that your career has to be ended. It may well be something which encourages your career, although it may not. But I was impressed that this person, though he was a very junior person in the aircraft, he in my eyes became the leader in the aircraft, not leader by title, but leader by virtue of his commitment to principle. Another person, Tom Monahan. Tom Monahan was an orphan, raised in a Catholic orphanage in Michigan. Got a scholarship to go to the University of Michigan, found it hard even to meet his side of the tuition, so he bought a small pizza parlor for $200. He and his brother put up $100 each, got this pizza parlor. He was working, selling pizzas, doing pretty well. His brother said, look, give me my $100 back, buy me out, because this is going nowhere. But Tom kept on working and opened more pizza shops as time went on. Tom Monahan's pizza company is Domino's Pizza, and a very successful enterprise. He was taken by the extraordinary success he had achieved financially, so he bought the Detroit Tigers, the baseball team. The year he bought them, they won the World Series. He went on to buy a collection of vintage automobiles. He continued his spending by building an extraordinary corporate headquarters and an office for himself, which was almost as big as this auditorium. And then at some point he said, you know what? I have forgotten my principles. I have strayed from the things I made that I believed were most important in my life. My Catholic upbringing in that orphanage. There were people who were poor around me, and I made a mistake. And so he changed course. And he signed something I'd never heard of called the Millionaire's Vow of Poverty. It said, I'll never fly again in a private aircraft. I'll never buy a luxury car. He sold the Detroit Tigers. He sold his collection of vintage automobiles. And he devoted himself to the things he believed were most important. When I met him, we were looking to buy his company. I got the chance to write a check. I'd never done this before, not on my account, but on the firm's account for over $1 billion. Gave him the check, and he proceeded to sign it over to Catholic Charities. All of it. This is a remarkable person who, even though he had been raised with principles, had strayed a bit from them and then came back to them and made that the centerpiece of his life. He is also a leader, in my view. He, by the way, has founded a university in Florida called Ave Maria University and devotes himself to education and his faith. So two men whose lives were guided by principle, who, in my view, become extraordinary American leaders. Now, let me turn to a different kind of setting, a different leader I met. I met a guy named Jim Leotode. And I said, Jim, tell me about your background. He said, well, I graduated second from my class in high school, second from the bottom. And it was not lost on me that I'd have a hard time getting into college. My dad wanted me to enlist in the military to get some discipline, but I convinced my dad to loan me $10,000 so I could open a restaurant. I wanted to sell hot dogs and things of that nature, but I found that $10,000 was insufficient to get the equipment you needed to make hot dogs and the special countertops and so forth. So the result of all that was that he said I decided just to make sandwiches instead. I worked out of our family garage. I put up some stainless steel tables as required under the code and made sandwiches, and then I delivered them. Now, Jim I found to be an extraordinarily engaging person. I've never seen him without a smile on his face. He is enthusiastic. When you talk to him, you're impressed by that energy and passion and the optimism that he has. He has an unusual laugh. It's kind of a giggle. And so when he laughs, you laugh, whether you want to or not. And that kind of enthusiasm and energy, I think, is part of what made him as successful as he is. Today, you know him better as Jimmy John of the Jimmy John's restaurants. He has about 1,500 restaurants in America, employs over 30,000 people. And I'm convinced that one of the principles of effective leaders is an optimistic outlook, a friendly, enthusiastic energy. An infectious laugh doesn't help, it doesn't hurt either. Jimmy John Leotode. Let me turn to someone else, Meg Whitman. Some of you may know that name, perhaps not. Meg and I worked together at Bain & Company, the consulting firm, for some years. And then she left to try her hand at running a business or two. The first couple of businesses she went into as the senior person didn't work out terribly well. And then she got an offer to become the chief executive officer of a startup company in the San Francisco area that became known as eBay. And she was highly successful and became extraordinarily well off. She took a departure from her business career and decided to run for governor of California. That was not successful. And then she was asked if, but when I say not successful, she got trounced by Jerry Brown in the race, a very dispiriting experience for her. She got asked to come in and run Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard is, I believe, the largest employer in the San Francisco Bay Area, and in many respects kind of the hothouse for all sorts of new ideas and technologies, part of what made Silicon Valley and the peninsula so successful. But Hewlett-Packard was floundering, looking for a way forward, and they came to her. And she said, I asked my friends whether I should accept the job, and she said they would say to me, Meg, don't do it. This could ruin your reputation. This could be terrible for you to go to this company that's in real trouble. And she said, you know, the worst thing that could ever happen to me has already happened. So I'm gonna take this job. And so she went to Hewlett-Packard, and she employed a technique that I found very helpful going in enterprises in trouble, whether it's a business or an Olympics or any kind of enterprise. And it has three elements. Number one, go in with a clear-eyed strategic audit. And I'm not talking just about a financial audit. I'm talking about a clear assessment of what the condition is of the enterprise. The team of people that are there, the competitors, how they stack up, the product that you're making or the service that you have, how it stacks up with the competition, your suppliers, your government relations. Just take the whole enterprise apart and honestly assess where you stand. That's number one. Then number two, develop a plan going forward based on three principles. Focus, focus, and focus. Almost any enterprise you'll be associated with that's in trouble has gotten in trouble in part because they're trying to do too many things at once. and they don't know what they really want to focus on. And so she said, the second thing I'd do besides making that strategic audit was deciding where we're going to head and focus on those things. And then number 3, perhaps the most important, build a team of people who are the right team to be able to deal with the strategy or the plan that you put in place. And that means oftentimes changing people, not because they're ineffective or not good people, but instead because they may not have the particular skills that you need for the plan that you have going forward. What I learned from Meg Whitman as I looked at her career was that she has gone into every setting she's gone into with clear eyes, with an unbiased willingness to be honest in her assessment of the enterprise that she is now responsible for. Every aspect of it, how it stacks up with the competition, what they need to do to go forward, what kind of people they'll have to bring in. There are far too many people I've seen in the world of business leadership and other types of leadership that somehow have a Pollyannish view that, well, everything will take care of itself, or even that God will step in, as if God needs our money. And the reality is that if you're going to be successful in enterprise, having the kind of clear-eyed perspective that Meg Whitman had is, in my opinion, one of the essential ingredients of effective leadership. I learned a similar thing in a car ride I had with a person named F. Enzio Buscia. He was a member of the first quorum of 70 of my church, and I was giving him a ride to my home where he was going to spend the night. And I asked him about his business career, and he said he had a very successful German business that fell on hard times. He was living in Germany. He is a German man, and he said the business got worse and worse. And he said in Germany, going bankrupt is not like it is in the United States. He said going bankrupt in Germany is an enormous black mark on someone, and is considered a enormous breach of faith for the people who work there. And he said, I was agonizing over the peril of the enterprise that I was responsible for. And he said, I went to my knees, I prayed and prayed for help, for God to step in. And he wondered, I'm sure, whether God would step in and protect him, because he was, after all, a good person. And he said on one occasion, after pleading with God to step in and to help him, he heard an audible voice. And the audible voice said, Arbeit. That's all. Arbeit, which translated means work. Very simply, what he was hearing was, luck isn't going to step in, Pollyanna's not going to step in, God's not going to step in. If you've got a difficult situation in an enterprise you're responsible for, the answer is work. Go at it yourself. And so like Meg, he became extraordinarily clear-eyed in the management of the enterprise he had responsibility for. Another leader I'll mention, Tom Stemberg. Tom Stemberg worked at a grocery store chain. I was doing a background check on Tom Stemberg and called his prior employer to see whether he had a great record at his prior employer. And I called the CEO and I said, did Tom Stemberg work for you? He said, yes. I said, what was his experience like there? He said, well, we fired him. And that's typically not a good thing to hear in a background check. And he explained the circumstances why he got fired. It related to his, supposed mismanagement of the produce department at that grocery store chain. But one thing Tom had done while he was working there was he had kept his eyes open and was always observant, highly curious, looking always for opportunities to make the business more successful, but also to see if there were things out there that could be done better that weren't being done by either their suppliers or their competitors or others. He came up with this idea that they were spending way too much money on office supplies, because he would get office supplies and look at how much it cost for office supplies in that grocery store chain. He said, this is just crazy. We have to spend this much money. So he, after he got fired and had some time on his hand, he started doing an analysis and collecting data about how much margin there was associated with office supplies. How much did it cost to buy the paper, to cut the paper, then to have it go to distributors, then distributors to dealers, then dealers to salespeople, then salespeople to the enterprise. And he recognized there's a huge margin all along the way. And these office supplies that ought to be selling for $1 were being sold for $2.50. And if you went to an office supply store or a drugstore that sold paper or pencils or pens, there was enormous margin. And you could have, he believed, an opportunity to dramatically reduce the margins in office supplies and build a company around that. And so he started his first store called Staples. And Staples has been an extraordinary success, made him a very successful person financially. But I'd note that what was unusual about Tom was the fact that he was always looking. He was observant. Wherever he wasn't just doing the job in a rote manner. He was looking for opportunities to do better for his employer, but also better for maybe getting other enterprises down the road, because he wanted to be an entrepreneur someday. He wanted to start his own business. And finding my experience is this: if you want to start your own business, it's almost impossible to come up with an idea out of the blue sky. Just some idea fall in your head. Instead, it's you're doing one job or you're carrying out one activity and you're noticing something that's not being done well, and you say, you know, someone ought to do something about that. And that's where the opportunities come, and that's what he found. Another guy with the same kind of background and experience in terms of a curious mind and a mindful eye is a guy named Harold Hamm, another person that I met. Harold Hamm, truck driver for 10 years, saved enough money to go to college. After the 10 years trucking, he got into college. He studied geology, and he decided to start looking at maps of the United States to see if there were some places that were not being evaluated for potential energy sources. Concluded that there had to be energy in North Dakota, and convinced an investor to let him drill an oil well to see if there was oil there, and there was not. 12 dry holes later, I don't know how he kept on getting the money to drill these things. They cost a couple of $1 million each to drill a dry hole. On the 13th, he actually hit oil. Now the Bakken Range is considered one of the largest oil ranges in the world. By the way, Harold Hamm is doing just fine. But having a curious mind, an inquisitive mind, and in every setting you're in, looking to say, what's missing here? What could be done better? Who could provide a better service that is being provided? That's one of the elements that I found in real leaders. They have that kind of curious, observational approach to almost everything. Now I'm going to mention one more, and that's Bill Marriott. I'll start with Bill Marriott Sr. Bill Marriott Sr. was born and raised in Marriott-Slaterville, right here in Utah, ranching family. As a young man, young married, he moved to Washington, D.C., and decided there was an opportunity in fast food, which didn't exist much then. Opened a hot dog stand and provided hot dogs to people. Also sold oatmeal. He was convinced that everybody needed oatmeal in the morning, so he had oatmeal available basically anytime his store was open. And he began opening other of these little shops. He called them hot shops that sold hot dogs. After being successful there, he thought that the Washington, D.C. area could use a motel, and he opened his first hotel. One of the things unusual about Bill Marriott Sr., who's, by the way, since passed away, is that he had an extraordinary affection for the people who worked for him and a genuine concern for his customers. He got to know them, he knew their names, and he appreciated them enormously. His son is now the chief executive officer of Marriott International. His son, Bill Marriott Jr., is, I think, 83, 84 years old. Bill inherited that same quality of extraordinary concern for his employees. It's hard for him to know all their names now because there are 700,000 people who every day wear a Marriott badge to work, 700,000, so he doesn't know them all by name. But he knows quite a few people and communicates as he goes into a hotel to meet with the general management and all the people who work there, his concern for them. And by the way, in this last, the Great Recession, which you're all familiar with, 2007, 2008, and so forth. He instructed the company to do everything possible to keep all of their employees working at least 20 hours a week. So the housekeeping staff and so forth, the bellman and so forth, that they would each get at least 20 hours a week, because he knew if they got 20 hours a week, that they would qualify for the company's medical benefits. And he wanted to make sure people didn't lose their medical benefits despite the stress that the entire company was under. This is a guy who communicated that through his personal example and the decisions he made. And my contention is that the 700,000 people who work there have been affected by the principles and culture of one person at the top. It's been such an important lesson to me that as I evaluated companies for me to invest in as a venture capitalist and as a private equity professional, the key element in my due diligence evaluating a potential CEO was whether they cared for the people they were working with. I'm convinced that the most essential ingredient for a successful leader is that they have genuine concern for others. That doesn't mean there haven't been people who are all about themselves and couldn't care a hoot about anybody else besides themselves. There are lots of ways of getting ahead temporarily. But to be a leader and to be able to affect the lives of other people, I believe it is essential that one has a genuine, heartfelt concern and caring for those other people. So we're talking about leadership, and you may wonder, well, gosh, when I leave this place, I'm not going to start at the top. I'm not going to be the general manager. I'm going to be at the bottom. So what's this got to do with me, and can I possibly remember any of this by the time I become a leader? And the answer is, you will be a leader the second you leave these doors. You're probably a leader already, or should be, because you can exhibit the very qualities that I've described in these people who I found to be such extraordinary leaders. One is you can abide by your most fundamental principles and decide what they are. You can, and if by virtue of any decision you make in your life, you depart from those principles, you can come back to them, as Tom Monahan of Domino's did. You can be enthusiastic and positive. No one wants to be around a negative person. You want to be around people that are laughing and smiling and optimistic, and you can do that. You can be clear-eyed and not expect good luck or divine intervention to save you from bad decisions. You can be inquisitive and observant and always on the lookout for opportunity, both for yourself and for others. And perhaps in emulating Bill Marriott, you can develop the kind of genuine concern for others that I think is so key to being a real leader. I'll end with, I'm told I'm going to end now. I see here, but I got a note here that I've got just a couple of minutes, but I'm going to mention this. If you're not sure what your fundamental principles are that Alan Goldberg and Tom Monahan and Bill Marriott and others clung to in their own life, you might carry out the practice which was imposed on me when I was working at Bain and Company. The leaders of the firm, Bill Bain, the leader of the firm, suggested that we hire a group of psychologists to help us understand how we could work better as a team. And in one little exercise, he said, I want you to write down the names of the 5 people you respect most, dead or alive. And so I wrote down the name of the master, Jesus Christ, of course, but then I wrote down the name of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. I don't recall precisely all the names, but my dad's name I wrote down and so forth. So I wrote down 5 names. He said, now next to those 5 names, I want you to write 3 qualities you associate with each one of those people. And so I wrote those qualities next to each name. And then he said, now I want you to look and see which qualities you've mentioned the most frequently. And love was one of them. I believe service of others was another. I can't remember what the third was, but I circled those things. He said, those things you circled are your most fundamental values, your core principles. And if you live your life in a way that's consistent with those principles, you will endure far less stress in your life, and you will have a life that is far more successful. Maybe not in terms of how the world works, because there's a lot of serendipity in the world as to how much money you're going to make or what kind of promotions you're going to get or not get. There's a lot that's out of your control. But what's in your control is whether or not you live in accordance with your core principles, something we call integrity. If you do that, your life will be successful, and you'll have a fulfilling and positive life. So for me, that's perhaps the most essential ingredient of real leadership. Understanding what are your core values, your core principles, living consistent with those, and then being able to live a life in such a way that you're able to lead others to find the beauty and the majesty of those principles as well. Thank you so much. Good to be with you this morning. Now, you get to ask some questions, And right here in the front here, we'll take your first question, and I'll repeat it because it's going to be hard for the whole audience to hear, and they may not get a microphone to you fast enough. Please.
So you mentioned when you was out there about your sons, having 5 sons, obviously family, something that's very important to them. Like in your political and in your business life, how have you been able to manage the home life and the work life and kind of balance those two?
Yeah, how do you balance? I've got 5 sons. How do you balance home life, work life, and so forth? And for me, I had home life, I had work life, I also had church life because I was asked by my church to do various things. And then I was involved in the community to a certain degree. And I used to joke that if I wasn't giving enough to any of them, then things were in balance, all right? But here's just a couple things that I did, and I stumbled into them. First, with regards to family. And that is, when I came home from work, and it was typically not until 7 or 7:30, I didn't touch work after I got home. Back then, we had a briefcase. Now we have an iPad or a iPhone. But I made my time at home completely devoted to my wife and my kids. And I did not let work interfere with what was happening in my home. And the same was true on Sundays and Saturdays. Let me elaborate on that, which is when I was going to law school, I'd gone to Brigham Young, as you know, undergraduate. I got into Harvard Law School, and I figured I'm going to flunk out of this place. All these guys had gone to very prestigious universities, more than mine. I won't be able to keep up. I don't know how I'm going to make it. So I felt I had to be studying all the time. And there was so much to read. In law school, there was so much to read, and I couldn't make heads or tails out of a lot of it. So I spent a lot of time reading this stuff. And if I wasn't studying, it was like there was this black cloud hanging over me. Because you should be studying, Mitt. And I didn't have time for church. When I was at church, it was like, oh, everyone else is studying. When I was at home with my kids, everyone else is studying. And then one day it hit me. You know what? It's time to really live the law of the Sabbath. And I'm not sure this was a religious recognition as much as it was, there's something to this law. And I said, you know what? From now on, I'm not going to study at all on Sunday. And I have to tell you, it made an enormous difference. Because on Sunday, there was no longer a black cloud hanging over me. On Sunday, church was a delight and a respite from the world. I could spend my time with my family and not feel like I should be down in the basement studying anymore. And I think I returned to work with much more energy and passion, returned to schoolwork, that is, with energy and passion on Monday. I'm not sure whether I'd have done better or worse if I had not done that. I just think I would have lived a worse life if I hadn't done that. And I carried that on to my business career. So when I got hired by Bill Bain to go to Bain & Company, I said to him, look, if there's an emergency, I'll work any day you need me. But regularly, I can't work on Sunday. It's just for me, that's a day I have to have for my church and my family. And he said, yeah, that's fine. If there was a crisis, he knew I'd step in. But for me, that was a line. So I think it's helpful in assessing the balance that you're going to have in your life to sort of draw some boundaries for yourself. And it makes it a lot easier as opposed to day after day trying to make every decision. Should I be here? Should I be there? Ann knew when I came home at the end of the day, I was 100% with her and the kids. And Sunday, 100% with her and the kids in church. And Saturday usually as well, but not always. So that's how I tried to keep it in balance. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
What put you aside on that path of
What put me on a path towards leadership? Well, I don't know that I've actually achieved all the things I would like to do in that regard. I can tell you that I feel more like Tom Monahan than Alan Goldberg. Tom Monahan was the one that deviated and then came back. I wish I could say that every decision I made, every statement I made was entirely consistent with my core principles. I've found myself going back and saying, oh, I wish I wouldn't have said that quite like I did. But I think I have to admit to have been enormously influenced by my dad and by people I read about. I like to read. I was an English major, and so I read a lot. And when I got the chance to read more for personal enlightenment and pleasure than for schoolwork, I read a lot of biographies. I read about people who had lived extraordinary lives and was impressed by them. And I think that helped shape my own thoughts about leadership and what I might be able to do in my life. My dad is the real deal when it comes to leadership. My dad was born in Mexico, living in Mormon colonies in Mexico. At about age 5 or 6, he and his family were expelled from Mexico by revolution there. They lived in government housing in El Paso, Texas for a while, impoverished. They moved from place to place, Los Angeles up to Idaho. His dad went bankrupt multiple times. My dad never had the money or time to graduate from college, and yet he became head of a United States car company, automobile company, manufacturer, and went on to become the governor of his state, Michigan, 3-term governor, ran for president, lost, became a member of the president's cabinet. This is a guy who I saw as an absolutely extraordinary leader who didn't worry about degrees, worried instead about his principles and making a difference. And I guess I think that if you aspire to position for yourself, you're probably the wrong person for the position. If you aspire to the position of leadership because you think you can make a difference for others, then you may well be on the right course. Yeah, thank you. Yes, sir.
I don't want to get political.
You can ask a political question. That's all right. I won't answer it, but you can ask it.
In this climate, what has changed since 2012 on the other side of the aisle, and how are you planning on dealing with that? And I'm talking about some of the tactics.
Yeah, what's changed since 2012 in the political realm, and how am I planning on dealing with it? The answer is that we continue to go downhill fast. It's not like it began in 2012. We've been going downhill fast in terms of the divisiveness in our country and the ugliness of politics. We've been going downhill for quite a while. The relationships that usually existed in the House and the Senate among people of different parties have been more and more divergent over these last several years, and it's not getting better. I don't believe that as one person in the Senate that I will be able to change the entire atmosphere of Washington. I do believe that one person, however, can make a difference in the people he or she interacts with, and that has the potential to spread to others. I say that in part because my experience as a governor. I got elected governor of Massachusetts, as you know, and my legislature was 89% Democrat. If you know anything about politics and the Constitution, you know that I had, therefore, virtually no power. Because anything I wanted to do, any veto I made would be overturned immediately because they had more than 2/3 of the votes. It was not lost on me that to get anything done, I had to get along with the Democrats across the aisle. So upon getting elected, I went around to their offices and met with them one by one, the various leaders of the various committees and so forth. Fortunately, the Senate President, Bob Travellini, said to me, the campaign is over, it's time for us to go about the people's business. I thought, boy, that's a great attitude. We agreed to meet every Monday for 1 to 2 hours, the Senate President, the Speaker of the House, both Democrats and myself, talk about whatever was on our mind and what was going on in the state. That never leaked, by the way. We collaborated sometimes. They did things that were perhaps not exactly what their party would have pushed, and so did I. And we worked together pretty darn well. I also instructed my staff, don't ever attack the Senate President or the Speaker of the House personally. And we might disagree on issues and talk about that, but treat them always with the highest degree of respect. I got a note one day from one of the two of them in my office, a little handwritten note on a scrap of paper saying, Governor, I've noticed for the last 6 months you've never attacked me. I'm going to stop attacking you. And I just think that there's really potential for people to show respect for others and for that to spread. It obviously helps best if that comes from the very top. I mentioned Bill Marriott. There are a lot of people in companies that are just as spectacular as he is, but they're not in a position to influence as many as he's able to influence. So that makes the biggest difference. And as hopefully the next junior senator from Utah, I will not be at the very top, but I will do my very best to communicate, if you will, American and Utah values of respect and dignity, but also fight vociferously against things I disagree with and for things that I think are important. Yeah, thank you. Back there, yes, sir.
Yeah, so what I was thinking is you talked a little bit about integrity. What leadership qualities do you feel that America lacks? And how can you do better that leadership qualities represent Utah?
Yeah, what leadership qualities does America lack? And I'm going to conflate two words together, which is leadership and, if you will, heroism, and courage. I think it's important for people to stand up and show respect for others, and to call out things that they think are divisive, or personally, I think things that are racist or misogynistic or anti-immigrant or anything of that nature needs to be called out, and but done in a respectful way. But I hear arguments sometimes: is diversity our strength, or is diversity not our strength? Well, put that aside for a moment. We're a diverse nation. We came here from various lands. We continue to come here from various lands. We are diverse. That is the reality. And if we're going to be strong, we have to be united. That's the nature of a nation that's diverse, is to encourage that unity. You can always play on the division. People can always play on the division and cause hatred and suspicion. But we're a diverse nation, and therefore it's incumbent upon us, more than perhaps nations that are less diverse, to come together and to encourage each other, and to welcome the reality of our diversity. And I think that's something which we need. I think one of the things we really need is young people to have a bigger impact on the political environment. Young people don't vote. It's unbelievable. I mean, like 80% of young people under 27 years old, won't vote in the elections. And young people who are uncynical and idealistic would have an enormous impact on the direction of our country if young people had more participation in voting. And individually, one vote may not make a difference. Collectively, one vote with others has an enormous impact. And I vote. I'll make this argument because it's important to me and perhaps to you. But if you read biographies, as I have, I read John Adams' biography, and he describes, I think his son, John Quincy Adams, says to him, "I wonder whether future generations will recognize what we sacrificed to create this country." And I wonder sometimes whether we remember how big the sacrifice was to create America, and how big the sacrifice was to let us continue to have our freedom. I mean, we lost hundreds of thousands of young men and women in world wars. And that sacrifice was made to give us the right for freedom and the right to vote. And if you don't vote, it's like you're saying, well, I don't really appreciate that sacrifice. I vote because I want to say thank you for that sacrifice. I appreciate it. I recognize it. I admire it. I accept it. I want the records of Utah and my town to show that I voted. Not because one vote will decide whether someone gets elected or not, but because one vote will show that I accepted that sacrifice. Thank you for the question. Yes, up here, young lady behind you. Yes.
So inevitably, each of us will have to do with failure.
Yes.
What is your advice to those that happen to
Yeah, what is my advice for those who will experience failure in life? And as you know, I've had a couple of those. If you hadn't heard, I lost. And I love, my favorite line on this was from Fritz Mondale. You're too young to remember Fritz Mondale, senator from Minnesota, who ran against Ronald Reagan and lost badly. At the end of that, he was asked, what did you learn? He said, well, all my life I wanted to run for president in the worst way, and that's just what I did. Here's, and this is important, so I hope we can underscore it in our own minds, in your minds as well as mine, which is, if you measure yourself, if your self-assessment of what kind of person you are is based upon how much money you make, or what promotion you make, or whether you win or lose a contest of some kind, you're really putting yourself in jeopardy, because those things are out of your control. Luck, the bounce of the ball, serendipity has an enormous impact on those things. I know extraordinarily capable people who'd be phenomenal leaders, who've had no chance to really be a leader from a secular way, because of things that just bounced against them, businesses that blew up, new technology that took them over, and so forth. So if you measure yourself by those things, you're really vulnerable to feeling pretty bad about yourself, because you will have failures. If instead you measure up yourself by things you can control, adherence to principle, faith in your God, love for others around you, your family, your friends. I mean, in my opinion, the real currency in life that you should evaluate your life upon is the friends you have and the people that you love. That's the currency of life. And you can be poor as a church mouse and never have won an election or won anything else, and yet be one of the most successful people in the world if you have people that you know and love and have friendships, if you have abided by your most fundamental principles, and if you have served your God in the way you think best. With that, I want to say thank you. I'm told I have to stop. You got to get going, and I appreciate your being here today. We have one more person who's going to come in and say hello, and we're going to Tom, come on back up here. Thank you so much. Appreciate your welcome.
First of all, I express to those students who are sitting in the overflow area apologies that we couldn't all fit in. I hope you were able to get as much out of the lecture as those of us here. For some of you, this is the first time you've met Governor Romney. It may also be the first time you get to meet President Tuminas. She would like to come up on behalf of Utah Valley University and thank Governor Romney for being here today. President.
Sure, we'll do a picture first. Thank you. So, Governor Romney, welcome to UVU. Can you see me behind this podium? So I just want to say thank you for being here. You may not remember, but you met me when I was decades younger as a student in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and then as a young professional in New York City in the Public Affairs Committee. So I'm older and wiser, I have to say. I want to thank you for several things. You know, I came in late, but I want to thank you for speaking about leadership, for speaking about integrity, for emphasizing reading. I love that you said reading. You read biography so you could learn wisdom from those who've come before you. I want to thank you for speaking about diversity and inclusion, for indeed, that is at the soul of Utah Valley University. And I want to thank you for talking about courage and ownership and participating in this democracy. It's my 9th day on the job, and wonderful things happen every single day. So thank you for being here. We'd love to see you again. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you.